Mario Maker has been an integral part of this channel, being pretty much the only topic I've covered for the past 2 years. I have a soft spot for games with level editors, so naturally I fell in love with a game that's just a level editor. It also went hand in hand with my passion for making dumb videos on the internet, which is why this dumb video in particular is a little strange to me. I thought I would be invested in Mario Maker for years to come. However, this just wasn't the case. And I don't think I'm alone in feeling this. It seems like a good number of people who used to be really passionate about it have started feeling a little burnt out. So I suppose it's time that I throw my hat in the ring and give this the proper breakdown it deserves. Why are the players who dreamed of a game like this starting to move away from it? What could have Nintendo done to prevent this, and what can they do moving forward in a potential Mario Maker 3? Obviously, we can't talk about Mario Maker 2 without talking about its predecessor. Despite being on Nintendo's unloved stepchild of a console, the Wii U, Mario Maker made a big splash with players and critics alike. Unofficial level builders have always been a thing, but to have Nintendo give us the keys to their most iconic franchise was a dream come true. Now, for some people, this meant unreasonably difficult death gauntlets, convoluted puzzles, and, of course, the more than occasional phallic object. But this didn't matter. The fact was that Nintendo created an incredibly accessible game design tool. Whether you were a casual player wanting to make levels for your friends, or a wannabe game designer hoping to hone in your skills. The fluidity between creating and playtesting levels, as well as the intuitive nature of building on the Wii U gamepad, meant that anyone could pick up the game and start crafting their own course in seconds. As much as I love to rag on the Wii U, you can't deny how perfect this kind of game was for the system. Personally, I wouldn't even own one if it weren't for Mario Maker. After many hours of watching other people play the game, even going so far as to emulate it on my computer, somehow I found myself at GameStop spending $300 on a console whose sole purpose was to play Mario Maker. However, I jumped into the game well after its prime. While I got a ton of enjoyment out of it, the community I found myself in was longing for something more. It seemed like any prospect of additional content updates were already out the window, as I hadn't seen one in almost 2 years at this point. And with the release of the Switch, there was the question of whether this meant a sequel was in the works, or if Nintendo considered the game a one-and-done experiment. Fortunately, this back and forth stopped cold in February 2019, with a much-awaited announcement trailer for the sequel we had been waiting for. With the hype meter at absolute full capacity, we counted down the days until June 28th. Oh, this is terrible. Just awful. Oh my god. Let's just say reception wasn't perfect. There were growing pains with building levels using a controller, confusion around needing an online subscription to even play levels from Course World, and the most headline-grabbing of them all, the absolutely abysmal online multiplayer. Going at it. Oh my god, wait, turn! Ah! Now, don't get me wrong, despite all of these issues, I was still personally having a blast with the game. It was exactly what I wanted out of a sequel. But as time went on, more and more little grievances began to arise. Now, I completely understand that I might come off as nitpicky as we delve a little bit deeper into these issues. Aside from a few major hiccups, the vast majority of these things could easily be shrugged off as no big deal. I'm not here to diminish anyone's enjoyment of the game, and I'd still even recommend getting it if you haven't already. But the unfortunate reality is that these little things, while not individually damning, start to add up. And Nintendo's refusal to resolve certain issues not only stunted the game's growth, but actually caused some of its most passionate fans to walk away. So let's go into a little bit more detail about what worked and what didn't. As with its predecessor, Mario Maker 2 has two distinct modes. You're either making levels or you're playing levels. This being said, even if you never bother to create your own course, the levels you play were made by somebody else. So we're going to start with the making portion of the game, as the course editor is kind of like the backbone of the entire experience. Now, despite the original Mario Maker being designed entirely around the Wii U gamepad, I was pleasantly surprised with how seamlessly its controls have been transferred over here. Building levels with a controller is surprisingly way more intuitive than it seemed at first glance, and I've actually grown to kind of prefer this method. With two different control schemes though, some of the level building process had to be streamlined a bit. Like, instead of vigorously shaking an item to change its form, or dragging mushrooms onto it to hopefully make it bigger, now all it takes is a long press to be able to see every possible modifier and variant at its disposal. Some people prefer the good old days of shaking course parts and testing out what items can be combined with others, arguing that it takes away an element of experimentation or surprise to the game. But I'd counter that this isn't where the experimentation is supposed to take place. I think the player should be able to see all the options available to them, and the surprise comes with seeing how they interact with all the other things they build themselves. I could care less with removing little Easter eggs or cute animations when the core part of the game, you know, making Mario levels, is made easier and more intuitive in the process. And if you're really distraught about the removal of the fly swatting minigame, I've got some good news. There's like hundreds of phone games that are almost identical. Apart from controls, and not yet diving into course parts, a few new, broader level customization options were added as well. The most immediately noticeable being 4 new level themes. Obviously, the more variety here the better. My only gripe with these is the lava and water being locked into the castle and forest themes, respectively. It'd really go a long way if these rising liquids were opened up to the rest of the backgrounds. And speaking of themes, let's talk about night themes. Setting a level to night mode gives a unique gameplay gimmick depending on the level theme, such as gusting wind in the desert, low gravity in the sky, and flipping the screen upside down in caverns. Again, while these increase level variety and encourage interesting gameplay, it's just a missed opportunity by locking them to specific game themes. And let's be honest, aside from the mechanic switch-ups, the night mode level themes are extremely lackluster. All of the usually visually appealing backgrounds are replaced with an empty sky dotted with some stars, and the music is replaced with this horribly tinny cover of the usual music tracks. The only unique night-themed background is on the airship, and it actually looks really good. The stormy clouds, the rain, it makes sense thematically and enhances the atmosphere. So why does it feel like I'm in some faraway galaxy in the ground theme? It just feels off. Vertical levels are also a new inclusion, and, well, let me rephrase, you can't actually make completely vertical levels, only vertical subworlds. I guess this kind of makes sense, but only in the context of the starting and ending platforms being fixed to the left and right sides of the main world. So while I'd obviously like to be able to make a completely vertical level without using up any pipes, until we get to place the starting position and end goal anywhere, that's just not going to happen. This isn't really a big deal though, and with vertical levels being such a staple in the Mario franchise, I'm glad we can finally make our own. Speaking of things to be glad about, Mario Maker 2 also added the ability for custom scrolling speeds, and a neat little trick to prevent the screen from scrolling past certain areas called scroll stop. I myself haven't gotten much use out of the custom scrolling feature, but people have figured out some really crazy uses for it, and it's obviously a welcome inclusion. Scroll stop, on the other hand, is, dare I say it, probably my favorite new feature in the entire sequel. By keeping contraptions, secret areas, or future sections hidden, it can make a level feel a lot more natural, and seem a lot larger than it actually is. It also enabled some really creative door mechanics, considering the scroll stop can be activated by destructible hard blocks. Overall, 10 out of 10 feature here. It's subtle things like these that really enable makers to create immersive experiences. And, on the topic of immersion, let's talk about one of my least favorite features, clear conditions. This one's sad, as alternate win conditions was actually something I hoped to get out of this sequel. but their implementation just seems extremely limited. You can only set one clear condition at a time, and the selection's pretty slim. Not only does completing a clear condition simply unlock the goal, meaning some of these objectives can be completely replicated without this feature, failing a clear condition doesn't even automatically kill the player. Instead, it politely lets them know they have no way of completing the level anymore, leaving them to either find a pit to jump into or manually restart. And God forbid there's any sort of challenge in a clear condition level, because checkpoints are disabled, and every time you restart, the entire screen is covered up by a graphic telling you what the clear condition is for the first, 5 seconds, as if it wasn't already stated on the loading screen or in a dedicated spot throughout the entire level. The fact that these were included is obviously better than if they were not. I just can't get over how unsatisfying they are to use, from both a creator and player perspective. Okay, I hear what you're saying. Tobias, you're almost X amount of minutes into the video and haven't even mentioned the new course parts. Who cares about clear conditions when we got pokies? And yeah, fair enough. All of these extra little features are just icing on the cake that is Mario Maker. The real substance being the building blocks used to create levels. So how does Mario Maker 2 do in regards to additional course parts? I mean, it should be pretty obvious, that's where the sequel shines. Slopes? I can't even believe these weren't in the first game, but they're here now and make levels feel way less blocky and rigid. And on-off switches. You know, I would have paid $60 just for this item alone, but we got way more than that. Icicles, spike balls, swinging claws, freaking Link as a playable character, multicolored pipes, the dry bones shell. There's so much here that no amount of complaining can take away from the fact that this is clearly the superior game compared to the original Mario Maker. And that's not even to mention Super Mario 3D World as a new game style. This one really took me by surprise, and I'll be honest, when I first tried making levels with it, I wasn't too impressed. A huge downside that came with this new game style was that it came with the caveat of not being interchangeable with the rest. One of the coolest features in Mario Maker, in my opinion, is how easy it is to switch between different course themes and game styles. It makes level building feel forgiving. It allows players to create without fear that halfway through they'll realize a different game style might have been a better choice, because they can just swap right to it and nothing would break. Sure, there are still exclusive items found in the 4 classic game styles, but they were each linked together, so swapping between them would only change those exclusive items. With 3D World being placed in an entirely separate category called Extra Game Styles, which, not sure why that's still plural, it created a hard divide between it and the others. This is further cemented and probably justified by the amount of course parts exclusive to 3D World. Now, at release, this really bothered me. I would have told you this seamless transitioning was integral to the game, and if they couldn't figure out how to implement that with 3D World, they shouldn't have added it at all. However, after taking some time and actually making some courses with it, I can appreciate the fact that they wanted to add a drastically different game style that felt completely unique to the others. Would I still like to see some items from the classic game styles make their way to this one? Of course. A majority of them have actually been proven to function perfectly fine in 3D World, thanks to hackers, the only thing missing being their textures. I honestly think most of these weren't included just because Nintendo thought, tracks might look a little ugly with the 2.5D visual style, just scrap it. Same with some of the 3D World exclusives absent in the other 4. I mean, clear pipes, exclamation blocks, crates. Fans have already made sprites for pretty much all of them. There's no real excuse other than artificial limitations. But I've actually grown to really enjoy making and playing levels in 3D World. It looks gorgeous, the player movement's solid, and its exclusive items bring a lot to the table. As it stands, it's once again a great inclusion with some poor execution. But that's just the making half of the game. What about the playing side? One new option for playing came in the form of Story Mode, a campaign packed with over 100 Nintendo-made courses meant to give players an example of good level design, as well as a jumping-off point for players unsure of what to make. The length is pretty good, only taking me a couple hours to complete start to finish, The levels are decent, and the story is a relatively simple one. Although, it is interesting to see how the crushing weight of capitalism has slowly but surely spread its way into the Mushroom Kingdom. You meet some fun characters like Based Toad and Dancing Frog, and unlock some items in the course editor along the way. One thing that really sours the experience here, though, is that there's actually some things in these levels that are impossible to make on your own. There's a handful of clear conditions only found in story mode, which just confuses me considering how seemingly innocuous they are, as well as a goddamn plain old stone block that, what the f***, Nintendo? We've been asking for this for so long. I don't want to use a POW block anymore. This would be so much simpler. The reasoning behind these being in story mode only is beyond me, but oh well. I would have had absolutely no complaints about it, but it just feels like they're taunting us at this point. You can look, but don't touch. But story mode isn't the place people go to play levels in this game anyway. This is Mario Maker. I want to play levels made by that kid from middle school who snapped a crow's neck just to see if he felt anything. Lucky for me, that's where Course World comes in. And, well, I hope you weren't looking for levels that were made by anyone that wasn't a potential serial killer. It was hard enough to find good levels in the first game, and it hasn't really gotten any better. Okay, sure, there's some more search options, levels can be tagged, but you still have to wade through a sea of garbage if you intend to find anything worth playing. The easiest way to find quality levels is still from outside sources, like Reddit or Discord or something. But this process is even more difficult now, because Nintendo never added a bookmarking site. In Mario Maker 1, you could find an interesting level, click the bookmark link, and then immediately find it in your saved levels on your Wii U. Now you're forced to manually enter a code anytime you find a level on the internet worth playing. Which, and this is really just the cherry on top, is made all the more baffling considering this time, on the Switch, we literally have an app on our phone that can integrate with the games on our system. Why the f*** can I browse custom stages in a fighting game, but not browse and save custom stages in a game about making and playing custom stages? God damn, Nintendo. Okay, I digress. And who knows, maybe you're one of the people who enjoys playing random trash, which I guess is what Endless Challenge is for. I never cared much for the original 100 Mario challenge, so naturally I don't care much for this one. However, I do think it's a little weird that this replaced the other. 100 Mario at least had a goal, a mission. I have this many lives and this many levels to beat. Endless is endless. Personally, I don't really care, but I feel like they could have had both, right? One for the goal-oriented player and one for the self-loathing completionist. Speaking of, Ninji Speedruns. I think this was a decent addition and helped retain at least some portion of the player base. At least, you know, the ones who enjoy speedrunning. It's just too bad there was only a new course every month and they were all Nintendo-made levels. Again, this is Mario Maker, a game about making and playing custom stages. This sort of format would have been perfect to highlight creations from the community. I think the Ninja Ghosts and visual leaderboard times should have been enabled for every single level in Course World. Speaking for myself, I would have been way more invested in competing for good times on levels I enjoyed rather than whatever Nintendo put out, and, you know, I'd also probably stand more of a chance that way too. Although, if you enjoy the competitive nature of speedrunning but think it's a little too fast-paced, might I suggest online multiplayer? In this mode, you and 3 other players fight against Nintendo's networking code in a game of chicken, seeing who's able to tolerate the lag for the longest amount of time without giving up, or until the connection just drops. Now, to be fair, the reason for this lag is because your connection in multiplayer matches is peer-to-peer, basically meaning if anyone in the match has bad internet, everyone else is going to experience the same bad connection too in order to keep things synced. I think this is valid. The problem is that there seems to be no meaningful process to ensure everyone's connection to the game is stable. They mentioned a fix for this in one of the earlier patches, and I've noticed some subtle improvements, but it's still nowhere near where it should be. And keep in mind, this is a paid service. Access to Course World in the first place requires a Nintendo Online subscription, and this is supposedly a reason to sign up. I will say that local multiplayer, on the other hand, knocked it out of the park. It's exactly what it should be, just couch co-op with up to 4 players on any level in Course World or your course spot. One thing I wish they added for both of these multiplayer modes is a way to genuinely create levels for co-op play. As it stands, every single level in Course World is put into the pool of potential levels to be played in online multiplayer, unless the creator uses up one of the 2 tags allotted to them to mark it as single player. I'd much rather be able to designate how many players a level was designed for, and whether it's for co-op or versus play. Instead, if you truly want to make a level that requires more than one person to complete, you're forced to use some convoluted contraption at the beginning of the stage. This way, the level is still beatable in single player, therefore uploadable, but also has a unique path when played in multiplayer. I actually had a hand in coming up with some of these designs, and while it was fun, I'd love for them to be made obsolete with a simple options menu. Finally, the latest feature added to the game as of now is World Maker. And keeping with the theme, this was a much requested and highly anticipated addition with a subpar implementation. From the very first game, the thing I wanted the most was a way to package levels together like a genuine Mario campaign. And while that's technically what we got, it's not exactly how I pictured it. For one, you can only make one. The super world you make is tied to your maker profile, and if you upload a new one or modify an existing one, anybody who is playing through your world loses all of their progress. I'd be actively making way more levels if I could upload, say, a puzzle world and a traditional world side by side. Additionally, the entire allure of playing a custom Mario world, at least for me anyway, is making secrets, one-up mushrooms, and coins meaningful. But if you run out of lives in a super world, the only penalty is losing a checkpoint on the current level you're on. That doesn't exactly make for a high-stakes situation, as I can achieve the same effect simply by pressing the start over button. On top of this, once again, finding good super worlds forces you back to third-party sites. There's a menu to browse through random selections, but this feels even worse than browsing for random courses, as now you have to play through a few half-baked levels before you realize that it's not going to get any better. While I'm still grateful a dedicated World Maker exists now, I think it could be improved upon heavily. Increasing the amount of super worlds that can be uploaded at once, increasing the level limit, and maybe throwing in some secret exit options would be a pretty great start. Unfortunately, World Maker was part of what Nintendo themselves dubbed the last major update. And so far, almost a year later, they've kept true on this promise. Following in the original Mario Maker's footsteps, the game saw 2 or 3 meaningful content updates within a year of its release, and then nothing. Besides the monthly speedruns, not a single new course part, level theme, game mode, nothing. I'd just like to know why. With the original, I was almost certain it was because development for Mario Maker 2 had begun, and there was no reason to update a game that would be irrelevant soon. For the sequel, I'll be honest, I don't see a Mario Maker 3 at least until the Nintendo Switch is no longer their main console. So what is it about Mario Maker that has Nintendo so hesitant to support it for longer than a year or two? Why are they so intent on dropping a handful of major updates and then calling the game finished, instead of a constant drip feed of new content that would almost certainly keep players hooked for longer? Also, hot take, I think Mario Maker is a perfect contender for paid DLC. Obviously, I don't prefer paying for additional content, but if it means that we'll get more consistently, I'd gladly spend the extra money. I think if DLC in Mario Maker becomes a thing, it should be purely on the maker, meaning anyone can play levels made with paid themes or course parts, but if you want to make stuff with them yourself, you have to cough up. And although Nintendo clearly doesn't have anything against DLC in their other games, they seem to not even consider it for the Maker series. The lack of updates is discouraging. When it feels like Nintendo is no longer interested in supporting the game, players start to question if their time is worth the investment anymore. I mean, what's the cutoff date? Recently they announced that uploading levels to the original game will no longer be supported 6 years after its release. And while that sounds like a long time, in terms of video game servers, it really isn't. Seems like an arbitrary restriction purely to encourage customers to buy the newest version. And speaking of unnecessary restriction, just because Nintendo decides to no longer update the game, you best believe their moderation bots are still gonna scour through the uploaded levels and remove things that aren't in line with their vision. Removing profanity and obscene imagery is fine with me. The game's rated E after all. Although their definition of inappropriate is a little broad, I get that it's better safe than sorry. No, it's their hard stance against glitches that they refuse to even fix that really bugs me. I'm not even talking psychro level glitches here, I mean minor stuff. The thought that some obscure mechanic in my level could be considered a glitch and potentially cause my level to be taken down and my account to be suspended doesn't exactly encourage me to think outside the box. And because their moderation system is run almost entirely by users manually reporting things, there's genuinely nothing preventing people from report bombing creators to get their levels taken down. Grand Pooh Bear, one of the biggest names in the Mario Maker community, one of the reasons I started playing in the first place, has experienced this since the original, and many times has given up on making levels entirely, knowing how easy it is for bad actors to get them removed. I think any kind of platform that supports user-generated content needs moderation. I'm not saying Nintendo should take a completely hands-off approach. Quite the opposite, actually. I feel like there should be a dedicated team to review these sorts of things. Currently, there's no way to appeal if your level's taken down or if your account's suspended, which is scary when this can potentially happen through no fault of your own. Instead of taking the time to ensure the proper safety nets with channels to go through for appeals, Nintendo's left the ship on autopilot. And while most of the actually nefarious trolls find ways to skirt the system, completely innocent bystanders get penalized for trivial mistakes or downright unjust reasons. So, what can be done about all this? Don't look at me, my uncle doesn't work at Nintendo. But if anyone's does, I've got some notes. The Mario Maker series struck a chord with myself and a ton of other people. It unlocked that childlike sense of creativity, where I used to draw on paper, but now I'm seeing these come to life. Forget the petty complaints about game styles, night themes, whatever. Doesn't matter. It's a good game. What the Mario Maker community wants is for the game to be supported with the same sort of passion they have for playing it. When Nintendo refuses to fix glaring issues, abruptly cuts off future updates, and maintains radio silence throughout the entire thing, it leaves the most passionate of the player base to question why they've invested so much time into something its publisher doesn't seem to care about or acknowledge. Mario Maker is a game about people creating unique experiences and sharing them with others. I think if Nintendo really wants the Maker series to succeed, they need to put these people first, by opening up a line of communication, listening to community feedback, and keeping up support for the game for a longer period of time. I think they'd honestly be surprised at just how big Mario Maker could be. But what do you think? Are you still playing and enjoying the game, or have you moved on to other things? As for myself, I'll still be making videos, but they might be a little different. Thanks so much for the incredible support over the past 2 years, and I hope you enjoy what's in store moving forward. Thanks for watching.